Throughout the history of intelligence agencies, one rule has always remained the same. Secrecy is the key to success. The longer an operation stays in the shadows, the higher the chances of completing the mission. But today's episode is about those who achieved success in a very different way, through popularity. These are the Navy SEALs, also known as SEAL operators, the primary tactical unit of the United States Special Operations Forces. And despite their global fame, they remain one of the most secretive units in the country. In fact, very few people even talked about them before 2011. That year, the world heard the phrase, Operation Neptune Spear, for the very first time. The mission to eliminate the man the United States called Enemy Number One, the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. Months of planning and preparation led to an operation that lasted just over 30 minutes. In May 2011, operators from Team 6, now better known as DEVGRU, landed at bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. But before the Navy SEALs ever set foot on the ground, one operator was deployed first. A military working dog named Cairo. The dog's role in missions like this is simple in theory, but extremely demanding in practice: to search for explosives and hidden threats. Cairo swept the entire compound. Only after that did the operators from Team 6 move in. They eliminated Osama bin Laden, completing one of the most brilliant and important special operations of the 21st century. And at this point, I'd like to shift the focus. Not to the operators themselves, but to their four-legged teammate. Dogs like Cairo are an essential and critically important part of modern special operations. Exact numbers remain classified, but as of 2012, training a single military working dog cost around $75,000. Today, that number can reach $250,000, depending on the dog's specialization. That cost includes training, conditioning, nutrition, and that's before we even mention specialized equipment. This gear can include tactical goggles equipped with a camera and microphone, allowing handlers to give commands remotely, special protective boots, a ballistic vest, and even a protective helmet. Right now, you're seeing the full loadout operators take with them on a mission, alongside their canine partner. And if you add everything up, the total cost of the operation to eliminate the world's most wanted terrorist reaches tens of millions of dollars. So what do you think? Expensive or cheap? In reality, it's pocket change when you consider the economic damage Osama bin Laden caused the United States.
Osama bin Laden is considered the most expensive enemy the United States has ever faced. By conservative estimates, he cost the country at least several $trillion over 15 years. This figure includes the impact of terrorist attacks, massive increases in security spending, the global manhunt, and countless attempts to track him down and eliminate him.
Now imagine the sense of relief the world felt when the terrorist leader was finally gone. And even though the SEAL teams themselves were created back in the 1960s, people only truly started talking about them after Operation Neptune Spear. At that moment, everyone was asking just two questions. Who are the operators of SEAL Team 6? And how can someone become one of them?
I was genuinely shocked when I first learned about SEAL Team 6. It was strange. I'd seen other special operations units. I knew about different SEAL teams, but I had never heard anything about Team 6.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Blackwood, and you're watching Behind the Scenes of Power. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you decide to subscribe, I hope you'll stick around for a long time. In today's video, I'll walk you through the history of the U.S. Navy SEALs. How and why the unit was created, why its operators are considered some of the most capable soldiers in the United States, what kind of missions they carry out, and what their training and selection process really looks like. We'll also talk about why the U.S. needed to create an additional unit, SEAL Team 6, and where the famous nickname Navy SEALs actually comes from. If you enjoy the video, feel free to support it with a like or a comment. One important clarification first. It's crucial to understand that the Navy SEALs and SEAL Team 6 are not the same thing. The SEALs are an entire special operations force, while SEAL Team 6 was, and still is, one of its elite strike components. In fact, that name was only used until 1987. Today, the unit is better known as DEVGRU, and to understand where it all began, we need to start with the unit as a whole. Even though the Navy SEALs were officially formed in the 1960s, their story actually begins much earlier, during World War II, more specifically with a unit known as the Underwater Demolition Teams, or UDTs. These were small groups of combat divers and demolition experts. During the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944, they played a critical role in changing the course of the battle. Here's why. The entire coastline, and the waters leading up to it, were packed with German fortifications. Nazi forces had done everything possible to prevent the Allies from landing troops, vehicles, or even approaching the shore by ship, and that's where the combat divers came in. They were the first to enter the battlefield. Under enemy fire, they swam in ahead of the main force, placing explosives on underwater obstacles and coastal defenses, clearing a path for ships and armored vehicles to reach the beach. One of their most significant achievements was the destruction of the so-called Belgian gates. These were massive metal anti-tank obstacles, about 2 meters tall and 3 meters wide, spread across the entire coastline. Through covert reconnaissance missions, the divers discovered that disabling a single gate required 16 explosive charges, placed at very specific points. If done correctly, the metal structure would collapse flat, allowing tanks to drive straight over it. That's exactly what happened. The German coastal defenses were breached, and the Normandy landings ultimately ended in an Allied victory. It was then that the United States realized something important. Having a unit like this on a permanent basis wasn't just useful, it was essential.
Combat divers are the true ancestors of the SEALs, not the ones who wade into the water from a warm, safe shoreline, but those who dive in fully aware of the risks, knowing it could be their last swim. It was from these men that the very first SEAL units were formed.
The first serious discussions about creating this unit in the United States began in 1961. It was a difficult time for the country. Tensions with the Soviet Union were escalating, the Vietnam War was intensifying, and President John F. Kennedy ordered the creation of a force capable of conducting covert and sabotage operations deep inside enemy territory. Naturally, the primary focus was on the Soviet Union, Cuba, and Vietnam. Cuba, in particular, was a major problem, especially after the events of 1961, when the United States became embroiled in the scandal of the Bay of Pigs invasion. In short, it was a failed landing of Cuban exiles, backed by the CIA. The operation went so badly that most of the fighters were killed or captured. The fallout was severe. A diplomatic scandal damaged international credibility, and Fidel Castro emerging as a national hero, who soon turned decisively toward closer ties with the Soviet Union. Kennedy was determined that failures like this would never happen again. So there was no desire to delay the creation of a new unit. Action had to be taken, and fast. By 1962, a detailed document was already sitting on the president's desk. It outlined the budget, mission objectives, development plans, and the exact role this new elite force would play. Even the name was simple and deliberate: SEAL. The first two letters, S-E, stand for sea, the letter A stands for air, and L stands for land. A clear message. These operators were meant to carry out missions anywhere. Together, the letters form the word SEAL, a marine mammal often called a sea lion or Navy SEAL. But despite the friendly-sounding name, the men of this unit were anything but harmless. They were, quite literally, machines built for war.
Guys who play the violin after high school will never become SEALs. The SEALs only take those whose adrenaline is constantly through the roof. This isn't a playground. It's a club for grown men.
The Navy SEALs began their first missions just 10 days after the unit was created. They were sent to Vietnam, but to be fair, at that stage they weren't used as a standalone combat force. Vietnam was seen primarily as a training ground for future special operations units. Early on, their work focused on intelligence gathering, analyzing combat operations, and training soldiers of the Republic of Vietnam. These training programs included amphibious landings and guerrilla warfare tactics. It wasn't until 1964 that the SEALs were officially authorized to take part in combat as a unit. In addition, working alongside CIA operatives, SEAL teams were involved in tracking down and eliminating guerrilla networks. According to official data, at least based on open sources, no more than 300 SEAL operators served in Vietnam during the entire period of U.S. involvement in the war. It was during their work against guerrilla forces that the SEALs earned nicknames like the Men with Green Faces, or sometimes Frogmen. You've probably seen this image in movies. A soldier emerging from the water, his face painted in dark green camouflage. That's a Navy SEAL. A well-known example appears in the film Act of Valor, which, by the way, is worth watching if you get the chance. In 1975, just weeks after the Vietnam War ended, the SEALs were back in action, this time against the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. after they seized an American merchant ship. The operation ended in success, and even though some outside the U.S. consider it unnecessary or poorly planned, Americans still view it as a successful mission. Then came 1980, an attempt to rescue American hostages taken during the Iranian Revolution. After that, the U.S. invasion of Grenada in 1983, where the SEALs once again played an active combat role. They operated in many conflict zones. But the key thing to understand is this. Up until the early 2000s, most SEAL missions were focused on sharpening combat skills. They were still learning how to become an elite force. At the time, their structure was built around regional specialization. Each team was assigned a specific part of the world, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and trained according to the unique conditions of that region. This was in addition to the standard training that every SEAL had to complete. Swimming, parachuting, close combat, foreign weapons. We'll get into that later. Overall, the unique capabilities of the Navy SEALs allow them to be present in virtually every conflict involving the United States. Their missions, however, are always highly specialized and usually the most difficult ones. They can do everything from intelligence gathering to directing artillery and air support. I'm not saying these are simple tasks. I'm saying that there are others who can do them too, just not the way the SEALs do.
There's so much happening around the world that most Americans don't even know about. But we, as military operators, have to know. More than that, we have to be there, and we have to take care of it.
In reality, the SEALs' first true elite combat baptism didn't happen in Vietnam, Cambodia, Iran, or even Grenada. It happened in Afghanistan. This country became a true hell for special operations forces, and for the U.S. military as a whole. The Navy SEALs were deployed there alongside tens of thousands of other troops. It was 2001, the start of Operation Enduring Freedom, aimed at rooting out terrorism after the Al-Qaeda attacks on the United States. Fighting against terrorists didn't just happen in Afghanistan. It also took place in the Philippines, Western Sahara, the Crimean Basin, and Central America. But Afghanistan posed an entirely different challenge. This was a place where terrorists couldn't be surprised by a sudden helicopter landing. Any unknown flying object over their base, it would simply be shot down. Attacking in convoys of vehicles was impossible because the terrain simply didn't allow it. Landing from the sea, the way Americans usually like to do it, was out of the question. Geography and terrain made everything different from what the textbooks said, and operators often had to improvise on the fly. One of the most vivid examples of this is the Battle of Wanat in 2008.
Deployments to Afghanistan were incredibly intense, brutally real. It's a strange feeling. You think you're ready. You know you've been trained for this. But once you're there, everything is completely different. You realize that every drop of sweat, every painful hour you spent in training is about to be tested in real conditions.
And now we come to SEAL selection and training. Only men who are U.S. citizens between 18 and 28 years old are eligible to join a SEAL team. Before they're allowed onto the course, everyone must pass a physical fitness test, the basic standard for all special operations units. This includes long marches, sprints, push-ups, pull-ups, and more. Next comes an interview with a psychologist. If the candidate is emotionally stable, balanced, and resilient, they move on to the course. If not, no amount of physical fitness will help. Instructors often say that SEAL training is 10% physical strength and 90% mental ability. Even though SEALs can operate in the air, on land, and in the water, water is their true specialty. Swimming and water training last 17 weeks. During this time, instructors teach candidates almost to the point of growing gills. There's a saying every SEAL hears in training: water is your home. When you attack, you come from the water. When you retreat, you return to the water. There, you are safe. But to truly feel safe, you must survive hellish trials, and far from everyone makes it through.
Candidates have their hands and feet bound behind their back. In this state, they must jump from a depth to the surface of a 5-meter pool and keep doing it for 15 minutes straight. Then, still bound, they have to swim for 15 minutes, followed by a distance swim, also with their hands and feet tied. And finally, the instructors throw a mask to the bottom of the pool. The candidate must dive down, retrieve it with their teeth, all while performing various exercises at the same time.
Now imagine how they swim once their hands and feet are free. Even then, it's far from easy. On land, the trials are just as grueling.
Training usually takes place on the beach, in full gear, where candidates must overcome a variety of obstacle courses. One of the toughest tests is called the Hell Week. All candidates lie in a line on the sand as icy waves from the Pacific Ocean crash over them. When they start turning blue from the cold, they must quickly gather all their gear and head out on a mission. Fail to do so, and their journey to SEAL school is over. Throughout the exercise, instructors constantly watch, making sure no one succumbs to hypothermia. The psychological pressure is relentless. Candidates are only allowed 3 to 4 hours of sleep per day. And that's just during the hellish week. Food isn't much better. There's a method to this cruelty. If a fully rested and fed soldier faces a situation where, for a week, they can't eat or sleep, their body goes into such extreme stress that their chance of surviving the selection process drops day by day. By preconditioning candidates in advance, their bodies can cope with these sudden extremes more effectively. SEALs are far too valuable a resource to lose, so during Hell Week, up to 75% of candidates are eliminated.
The most intense part? You sit in the same classroom with your fellow candidates, and together, you go through every single trial. Then the instructor stops you and says, look at the person in front of you, now behind you. Look to your left and right. Only one of you will make it through. And it's true.
And when it comes to training, the final stage of preparation is air operations. At this stage, future Navy SEALs learn how to fast rope and deploy from helicopters, and they're even taught how to fly one. That's not accidental. If, for any reason, there's no pilot available, they need to know what to do. At the same stage, candidates receive all the knowledge required to coordinate air support, as well as how to operate under enemy air attacks. Only after completing training that lasts 1 year and 17 weeks are they allowed to call themselves Navy SEALs. But even then, it doesn't mean they're immediately sent into combat. Think of it as graduation, not the finish line. What follows are relentless, ongoing training cycles. Urban combat, hostage rescue operations, advanced weapons handling, and even foreign language courses. Because the perfect military operation is the one where no one gets hurt and brute force never has to be used. One final note on training. Urban warfare is one of the most critical elements of SEAL preparation. After the events of September 11th, SEAL teams placed a strong emphasis on counterterrorism. At their training facilities, they practice freeing hostages from airplanes, ships, buildings, vehicles, and more, anywhere it might be needed.
Since the very creation of the SEALs, their operators have been in constant training. A major focus today is marksmanship, especially long-range precision shooting. But the strongest emphasis is placed on urban combat tactics. That's because these skills are critical for carrying out hostage rescue operations.
Now it's time to talk about a very special SEAL unit. SEAL Team 6. Its creation was triggered by one of the most painful incidents in modern American history. In 1979, a revolution erupted in Iran. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was overthrown. Cars were burned, portraits torn down, shops destroyed, and soon, the unrest reached the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. In November 1979, radical Islamist groups stormed the compound. Thousands of armed Iranians, mostly students, broke into the building. 66 American citizens were taken hostage. Iran's new leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, issued an ultimatum to the White House. The hostages would be released only if the United States handed over the Shah and his family, who had fled to the U.S. On one side were the lives of more than 50 Americans. On the other, the global reputation of Washington. The United States accepted the challenge and began preparing a rescue mission. President Jimmy Carter, when approving the operation, likely never imagined that the Islamic Revolution would not only crush the mission, but also deliver a political knockout to his presidency. Preparation lasted nearly 4 months, until April 1980. By that time, Iran had already released 13 hostages, several women and African Americans. But 53 Americans remained in captivity. The operation was named Operation Eagle Claw. It involved the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Navy SEALs. The plan was complex. 8 helicopters were to fly deep into Iran, extract the hostages, and return them safely to an aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, a second group would sabotage power infrastructure, making it harder for Iranian forces to respond. A third group was tasked with seizing a military airfield to secure the operation and provide air cover. Then came D-Day. On April 24th, Operation Eagle Claw launched from an aircraft carrier. 8 helicopters carrying Special Operations Forces took off. Almost immediately, 2 helicopters were forced to land due to mechanical failures. The remaining aircraft arrived at the rendezvous point an hour and a half late.
The pilots simply weren't prepared for the severe desert sandstorms. And this was only the beginning of the disaster.
The helicopter landing site, Desert 1, was supposed to be completely secret. But during the operation, a civilian bus appeared on the route. All passengers had to be detained. Later, the Americans spotted an Iranian tanker carrying contraband fuel. When the truck refused to stop, it was destroyed.
Instead of 8 helicopters, only 5 were operational during the first phase of the mission, and that wasn't enough. The decision was difficult, but ultimately, they had no choice: abort and leave Iran. In the middle of a sandstorm, one helicopter collided with a fully fueled Hercules transport plane that had arrived for refueling. Khomeini already knew about the American operation and had sent forces to intercept the intruders. The mission was in such a rush that the Americans had to abandon both their equipment and the bodies of their soldiers.
There was no battle, no firefight, but, to my deep sorrow, 8 crew members from the 2 aircraft that exploded were killed, and several others were injured. Our forces immediately withdrew from Iran, and those who were wounded received medical treatment.
Khomeini ordered that the hostages be split up into small groups, held at multiple locations across Iran. It was no longer possible to free them all at once, and their fate hung in the balance. The United States planned a new rescue operation, but in July 1980, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a fierce adversary of Khomeini, died, removing the issue of his extradition from the table. By September 1980, the Iran-Iraq War had begun. On Iraq's side were Egypt and the Arab League, a total of 21 nations. Tehran, via third parties, received word that the Americans could supply weapons, loosening tensions slightly. A year later, Washington lifted sanctions on Iran, and after 444 days in captivity, Khomeini released the remaining hostages. About 50 Americans finally returned home. Here's an interesting point. Even before the failed Operation Eagle Claw, Navy officer Richard Marcinko had argued that missions like this should be handled by dedicated, specialized units, not a mix of forces. No one listened at the time, but when it became clear that the hostages couldn't be saved, he was authorized to create a new unit. Marcinko became the first commander of this unit, which he called SEAL Team 6. He handpicked the best combat divers and the top SEALs from other units. The unit was officially announced in October 1980, and it was immediately considered the most elite SEAL unit. There's even a theory that the number 6 was chosen because of the Cold War. At the time, there were only 2 other teams, so the number was meant to mislead adversaries about the actual number of SEAL teams. Initially, the new unit had 75 combat swimmers, but according to Marcinko, they trained harder than anyone else. He led the team from 1980 to 1983. In 1987, SEAL Team 6 was disbanded, and from its base, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEVGRU, was formed. Today, DEVGRU is one of the most secretive units in the United States, with top-secret clearance. Its primary mission is counterterrorism. DEVGRU is divided into 6 color-coded squadrons: gold, silver, blue, red, black, and gray. These squads function as assault teams, reconnaissance, and combat swimmers. As you can see, this video is more of an introduction to the SEAL's special unit, because since its creation, they've completed countless missions. Their record includes Vietnam War, operations in Lebanon, the Grenada invasion, capturing ships such as the Achille Lauro and Maersk Alabama, the Panama invasion, the Gulf War, operations in Somalia, the Battle of Mogadishu, Operation Enduring Freedom, the Iraq War, Operation Neptune Spear, and many, many more. And that's only what is publicly known. Members of this unit operate all over the world, and each of their missions could be its own video.
They operate with complete autonomy, total freedom of action. SEALs take care of their own operations. They decide what to procure, what to develop, and how to execute missions. The only people fully aware of everything they do are their commanding officer, a few officials in the Department of Defense, and the President of the United States.
This is a truly unique unit. Even with past failures, their reputation is unmatched. Becoming a Navy SEAL is a dream for many Americans, but very few can withstand the physical and mental demands of selection, training, and service. They also have a great motto, one of my favorites: "The only easy day was yesterday." Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to help it grow. See you later.